Queen's, or now the King's English, I should say. Now we speak in the King's English. There is some various differences we use across the planet. So just to make a few things clear, we will try and say harvester when we're talking about the big machine we sit in to drive around and do harvest, although over here we call it the header. And then when we're talking about the bit that goes on and you go and cut things up with it, better known as over here as the front, and you call it the header, just be aware of those little idiosyncrasies. And plus, I know that as clear as I can try and speak, and anyone else can, there can be the problems associated with the Zoom that sounds can't be great. So please, if you've got questions, want to get your questions, just take your time and just speak slowly with us, because we're a long way away and it may take a little while to get to us, and we're slow over here, but we'll do our best to try and understand. And without further ado, I probably should explain what we're trying to do over the next couple of sessions. Would that be I think that might help. So from the last call where we did a bit of an intro, we had a couple of guys talking about harvest weed seed control generally, and a couple of guys from Australia who were doing it and told us a little bit about their experience. We thought it would be a good idea, and going back to what we think is the most important aspect, first of all, which is the basics of harvester setup, because if we haven't got harvester setup right, it would be fair to say, guys, that harvest weed seed control is just not going to happen. So what we're going to do is the next few sessions, we're going to focus on the three areas going through the harvester. So starting at the front and then working our way through to those mills and chaff lining and chaff decks, and getting input from yourselves in terms of what your questions are around that. But so we'll focus on first of all, how do we get it into the machine to start with? So that header front, that bit that does the work at the front, we're going to talk about that only today. And then next time we come back, we'll start to go into the threshing area and separation area before we go further back. Okay, so that's what we're going to try and do, with the aim of trying to also deal with your questions that you've got. I know that a few questions have come through, and there'll be questions specifically I know that's going to relate to harvest weed seed control you're going to have and what we should be doing. And we'll pull on the expertise of Pete Newms, who's got that expertise, and also pulling on the guys sitting to my left. So I think that's what we want to try and cover. Michael, have I missed anything?
No, that's it.
Yeah, okay. I think that's probably it. So without further, we probably talk about the header front. I might hand over to the guys to my left. So about that setup, what's the first thing we need to think about with the front itself? What are we trying to, what do the guys need to be thinking about?
Where they're getting their losses. So you need to determine where your losses are first. So start with the first thing, crop divider. Are your losses related to where the crop divider is? Are there things we can do to the crop divider to divide our crop, basically? That can change the losses that we get. So that's probably one very important point. Probably another one is thinking about the weed seed that we're trying to gather as well, and whether it's, you know, much taller, much more fragile, or shorter and down in the crop canopy. Those couple of things, probably first, so understanding that will tell us a lot about what we need to do to let's say optimize the feeding on the front before it even gets to the knife or the cut bar.
So you're talking there, when we talk about the divider, everyone knows that that's the bit that first hits the crop. The aim being, as you're saying there, Brett, is unless we can get that crop and our wheat seed into that front, we'd be wasting our time, Cassie. That's a fair?
Yeah, if we don't get it in, we might as well just leave the whole thing.
What I've seen over the last few years, setting machines up, I know that the owner of the machine or the owner of the property is not always on the machine. You just grab someone from the street, put it on the machine and say, right, go and harvest. There's a lot of setups that the manufacturers, whether it's red or green or yellow, there's a lot of setups that they go through and a lot of calibrations on the front or on the headers. Please go through that and just make sure that everything is calibrated, your height sensing, and where your reel should run. Like a reel is doing a lot of the crop damage and crop losses. So use the bushel plus, put it down and see what you can find in there once the front is over it, and determine what losses you get. I've seen yield improvements just by adjusting your reel, whether it's forward or down or backwards or whatever. So the reel is very important. Do the setup first before you just put your operator on it.
So just a couple of questions there, Cassie. When we're looking at, particularly for weeds, we know that some of those weeds, we need to be able to get them to cut properly. When we look at the cut in terms of the knife and the guards, what do we need to be thinking about there?
Sharp knife and sharp guards, I would say, is probably our first thing that we need to go and look for.
Right.
And even damaged knife sections. You know, you get to a paddock or a land and there's knife sections that's broken off, so you leave that row there. So as soon as you leave that row, you know, that's a foot of weeds that you leave.
Yeah.
30, 40 foot front. So yeah, just make sure that your knife and guards are sharp and look at it on a daily basis.
So if the weed is quite green and our knife's not sharp, what tends to happen to the weeds themselves, Cassie?
It shatters. So then you spread the weed seed instead of collecting it.
Right.
So it's not a clean cut. The plant itself will do that when the knife hits it. So it shatters your seed everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So having a sharp knife and a good guard to be able to cut against is going to be essential for us to get it on.
Yeah.
And that will make sure we're actually getting that weed in terms of helping get that weed into the front and the crop into the front. I know we had a question come from the guys. They were saying, is there anything they're doing we can do to try and help get those weeds in to the front, like doing things to our guards or doing, is there things that you've used, guys? Have you tried stuff that's helped?
If your weed is falling or it's lower than your crop canopy, obviously you've got to get close to the ground to get it. So sometimes things like crop lifters or other enhancements to your front will actually help and aid lifting that material and getting it in and being able to cut it and put it on the platform. That's probably the first thing. Another part of that is reel speed, reel position, and finger angle for your pickup reel. You challenge with a lot of these weed seeds, and there's a particularly good video on YouTube that comes from the Uni Missouri, and it's on the Seed Terminator website as well. And they actually put a camera on the ground and they're harvesting soybeans with Palmer amaranth. The reel comes in and they're trying to grab the soybean, but the palmer is standing, a foot taller than it. And as the reel comes through it, you can see the seed shedding out of that palmer. And that's probably the biggest drama. And I understand that, we're trying to get the reel to grab the crop material and pull it onto our platform, but we might need to rethink that so we can harvest the palmer. And that might literally mean bringing the reel right back over the platform and just keeping it at the very end, so that weed seed isn't shedding off the platform before it even gets cut. So that's, it's just a little bit of, I'm not going to say forward thinking, but it's a little bit of changing the way that we would normally do things, specifically to harvest the weed seed.
I just want to add on to Brett there. You've seen the video of what Brett said of the reel fingers coming in and pushes the weed seed out of the plant. It will have the same effect if your reel speed is too quick. If it is too fast, it will knock the seed out of the plant before it gets cut, before it goes onto your platform.
So what sort of, that's a good point, guys. So in terms of the reel, what's the speed generally and angles that the guys should be thinking about for how they use their reel in those sort of shatter type crops versus say a cereal? So we think of let's talk about cereals first, and then we'll go to others. So let's talk about soil or lupins afterwards. So what do they generally should they do for real?
Yep. If we start off with the angle of the finger, I would like to have the finger basically on a 90-degree angle on top of the knife. And then when we get to speed, the function of the reel is it just needs to flick the plant into the cutter bar or onto the Draper belts. So we don't want that reel to go flat out. If it goes flat out, it will get it on there, but it will also shatter the plant. That's what we don't want. So ground speed, you can go 5% quicker than ground speed, 5% faster, just a little bit quicker than ground speed. It just needs to push the plant in through the knife onto the Draper belt.
Right. Okay. And in terms of how far you're putting that into the crop, that finger, when we're talking about the finger, just so we got some clarity, we talk about either we call it tine or a finger that comes off that reel. We're all clear about that. Can you just give me a thumbs up? We understand. Yeah. Again, no thumbs up. Yeah. Thank you. I like to see some thumbs. That's good. So how far down do we try and put that in? Let's say when we're dealing with cereals.
We don't want to shovel it up, so we don't need to dig into the crop and go and grab it. About 50 mils of your fingers, that's all that you need, about 2 inches. So you just need to get in there. It just needs to have good enough grip on the material to pull it in. That's all that you want.
Yeah, okay. So I think, Brett, you've shown me before that a good indicator is the fact that if we're doing it too far when there's papers appearing off the top of that bar.
Yeah, if you're losing the paint off the driver bar, you're probably diving in too far. Yeah, we don't want to do that. The challenge with us is, you know, if you're trying to tip that crop material and you've got a weed that's a foot taller than it, then that positioning is absolutely critical because yes, we know that we're out there primarily trying to harvest our crop. That's where we get our cash from. But if we've got a weed problem, which we have, then we need to just switch our brain a little bit and go, I'm going to move that because I want to leave that material on my platform. I want to be able to harvest that as well. So you just need to consider it.
So with that in mind, when we're thinking and seeing what we can see ahead of us in the field or paddock, we see that there may be taller weeds there. Is it something we should be doing with the reel or with the platform itself? It's possible.
So what I've always been able to do, where we've got a long enough platform, so a Draper platform, fine. You can actually pull your reel back quite a long way behind your cutter bar so that the back section, the very lowest point of your reel is further behind the cutter bar. And so what this means is that the crop material itself standing that you're harvesting into gets cut before the reel actually touches it. But the reel is actually pulling on the weed that's standing above it earlier. So it's still in the downward motion. So that downward motion is grabbing the weed, but the very bottom of our reel is actually tipping the harvestable crop. But we're still only contacting that weed above the cutter bar. So it's going to come backwards, it's going to fall backwards, and you end up with less of it dropped on the ground.
Right, okay. So and is that where we've got the ability to put on some serial extensions or something underneath to go on those guards to allow the weeds to fall on there as well?
Absolutely. Anything that you can do to extend that cutter bar forward and change the position or extend our platform forward and collect more of that material that's being shed or is dropping early, the better we are. The better we are for weed seed harvesting.
Right, okay. So that allows us that. So we're saying that try and if you've got those, I don't know what platforms or what fronts, header fronts you guys have got, But if you're able to, what I'm understanding you, Brett, is we want to pull that reel back, and if it's got an extendable front, push it forward.
Yeah.
So that we can actually, when we're using that reel, pull those taller weed seeds into our mat. Okay, so that sounds good.
But try and not engage them until they're above the cutter bar. The problem is if we're setting the bottom of our reel directly above our cutter bar and to engage our crop material, and we've got a weed that's a foot taller, it's contacted it, 2 feet in front.
Right.
And we've just knocked all of our weed seed off and straight on the ground. If we don't get it on the platform, we can't deal with it. We can't put it in a windrow, we can't smash it, we can't do anything with it.
Right.
It's already on the ground. It's too late.
Just make a comment, Pete. Ask a question. Hello, everyone. Just wanted to talk about the weed species, and maybe Michael might give us a bit of a heads up here. I know that Michael Walsh went over there years ago and measured the seed retention on pigweed, on Palmer amaranth, and it was very, very good. But just for these guys, I just wonder if, like, we've focused a lot on grass and wild radish, probably in Australia for harvest weed seed control. But maybe, Michael, just a couple of comments about the exact species that you're dealing with, and just in terms of the size of them sticking out of the top of the crop and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So like you mentioned, Palmer amaranth and then common water hemp, both pigweed species are number 1 and 2 weeds in soybeans by far and away across the United States. Typically those are well above the height of the soybean canopy. I mean, if not, 1 foot above, sometimes 2-3 feet above, but probably for the most part, 1 to 2 feet above the soybean canopy. And most of those seeds aren't down in the soybean crop. But the soybean crop itself, actually, the pods can be fairly low on the stem. And so to harvest soybeans, the cutter bar is basically right above the ground anyway. So we sort of built in getting that header low into our soybean harvest, which is going to help us, I think, with harvest weed seed control. But I'd say most of the other weeds that we'd be after, I know Texas panicum was mentioned. That's probably, above the cutter bar for soybean, if not above the canopy. But it typically, when I've seen it, is kind of right at the same level of the soybean canopy, maybe a little bit taller, kind of like ryegrass and wheat. It's just sticking out a little bit, but it can be still below it as well. So other weed species, I mean, would kind of fall, I think, in that same kind of categories as far as where they are. But we do have we do have very good seed retention on the pigweeds, ragweeds, less so on our summer annual grasses. The summer annual grasses, so like barnyard grass, Texas panicum, the other ones that we've measured, can be as low as 50% seed retention at the time of harvest. Sometimes it's 80, but it's not the 95% that the pigweeds are at the time of harvest. Is that,
Thanks,
good context?
Yeah, and just, I didn't quite hear what you said, that you were saying on the pigweeds, the seeds are above the soybean canopy?
Yeah,
mostly. Yeah.
Yep. Typically 1 to 2 feet above, so quite a ways above the soybean canopy.
And one other complication that I'm aware of is that when you're harvesting corn, you've got, I don't know what you call it, but a corn front or a corn header, what do you call it?
Yep, corn header. Yep.
Corn header. Okay, and I know Mike Walsh is over there having a look at those at the moment, but that is a bit of a complication as well. We probably can't cover that, but I was just sort of making everyone aware of it in Australia, that they've got the spinning wheels, hey, and that can just make the seeds sort of explode into the air as you're harvesting the weeds. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can think of it as 2 rollers, and it rolls the stalk down, and then there's plates right above those rollers, and so when the corn cob hits that, it breaks off, and then there's gathering chains that pull that into the combine. And so, yeah, for a corn header, a lot of the weed seeds will actually probably are going to go right down. They'll shoot down with the corn stalks. And so a lot of those weed seeds will kind of fly up and off, but some of them will probably go right down through that gap where the corn stalks go. So Yeah, a bit of a question of how many weed seeds are going to get into the combine, and Michael Walsh was lucky enough to have him here in Virginia last week, and we were looking at some of that. So we'll have some numbers soon, and I know Kevin Bradley at University of Missouri is doing that too. I think he's leading a team of maybe a couple other states. So
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think you make a very valid point, which is depending on the crop you're going to be going into, you're obviously going to face some interesting challenges there, guys. Yeah. Any comment on the corn or
the challenge with corn, purely as Michael said, is for the way that the corn head works. I reckon you're going to struggle to get 10% of that weed seed into the machine. So corn face might be particularly challenging to try and do anything, really.
yeah, you got any comment there, Cash?
Yeah, same thing. If you can't get it into the machine, you can't deal with it. So if for a start off, I don't know what the row spacing on corn is, but you know, all of a sudden you're working with 18 inches that's not getting into your machine, and then you know a foot of material that's coming in. So all of a sudden you're on the back foot before you start.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of that discussion was we've got these really big weeds that are sticking way out above the crop. How to attack them with something like a finger tine reel, or is that the best implement? Do we want that thing right out of the way, and or is there something else there? I mean, I'm just saying it because our weeds in Australia are often only that little bit above the crop, mostly, aren't they? But we're talking about some bloody monsters here.
Yeah. You want to make a comment on that?
During the 90s, when I used to drive a combine every harvest, I would actually lift my reel all the way up and out of the way. So we had, very, very bad, or I wouldn't say very bad, that Phil would get upset if I said that, but we had significant radish problems in lupins, but we could grow a pretty decent lupin crop. So we'd actually lift the reel all the way up and out of the way and just use the crop bulk and harvest literally, an inch off the ground and take absolutely everything and put it through the machine. Right. So the reel didn't even come in contact with it. Okay. If that will work for your crop, then that's an option for being able to do this. But remember, when we're doing it, we weren't using a Draper platform. We were using what you would now see as a Vario or an auger front for that. And that would probably work. And I understand what Nunes is saying about, these very tall weeds. One of those auger fronts will grab that, crunch it, feed it in without having to have a reel in there to do that.
Yeah.
So that's an option for trying to deal with one of those, but for that sort of crop condition, but it's specific to that crop condition.
Yeah, and that's for an auger front?
For an auger front.
Okay, but for Drapers?
Challenging.
Yeah, okay.
I was actually the agronomist on that farm back then, so I can't help but feel partially responsible. But Michael, what sort of balance of auger fronts versus Draper fronts are you looking at there? Have you guys already covered this? Or?
No, I mean, I guess the farmers, you guys might chime in here. I reckon it's probably about 50-50, but more and more people are moving to the Draper fronts.
Can we get some comment from the guys? What are you guys using? Ollie, what are you using?
Draper fronts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's an even, much more even feed into the combine. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what, Stephen, what are you using if you're not with your air conditioner?
He's air conditioning.
He's air conditioning.
No, it's a flex head, but we harvest more grain sorghum than we do beans, so we don't really need to get that low. But generally, if we are harvesting beans, we're taking in every single part of the weed, seed and all. This with the sorghum, it's only the taller weeds, the part of the Texas panicum, the palmer, and not really so much of that false ragweed.
Right. Okay. And what, anybody else got anyone using an auger fronts only? Anyone, just give me a thumbs up, thumbs if you're just using an auger. Okay, so, and if you're using a draper, can you give me a thumb? Thumbs up for drapers. Claudia, what do you? So we got to mainly sounds like drapers by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Been most common.
Yeah, okay. So give me consideration of that weed's height and size we're dealing with. We're saying that we want to be able to get the reel out of the way, or as you were saying earlier, using the weed itself to try and pull the crop in and keeping that reel quite high.
Yeah, so the first point that you contact the crop is above the cutter bar, not in front of it.
Right,
Because if you contact it there and it starts to shed that weed seed,
right,
it just falls straight to the ground and misses it. So it has to be above the cutter bar. So as you were saying, Pete, you know, finger extensions or anything that you can take that forward will help to gather that material.
yeah, okay.
We can't use any harvest weed seed control method if we don't put it into the machine.
Yeah, okay.
It's got to get in there first.
Got to get in there first. Okay, so that's trying to get us into feeding into the front itself. Is there anything in terms of then the getting, once we've got it onto there, because I know that we talk about then getting into the feeder house, anything we need to do with the feed drums to actually get that to work effectively? What's your comments on the feed drum of the feed house? Because I know we can get losses there, can we not? What's your comments, Cass?
Before we probably get to the feed drum, we probably just need to look at the rubbers transition
Yeah, good point.
between the drapers and the center draper belt. So where the center draper belts come, or the side draper belt, sorry, come around and then onto the center draper belt, there's fairly big gaps at the bottom of them. And I know that John Deere's got some kits that you put in there, just with rubber mats that you put in to lift it up a little bit and to cover that gap a little bit. So it just prevents any seed plus your crop from going underneath the belt and losing it at the bottom of the draper belts. So I think that's probably our first thing before we get to our drums, to just make sure that we seal that up properly. And then we need to have a look at our finger drum timing. So when the material gets to the finger drum, we pick it up and throw it into the machine. If our timing of our fingers are incorrectly, the material will just sit there and we'll smash it up while it's sitting in the front. And we don't want that. We want it to go into the machine itself. So finger timing important. We've been doing schools this week, about 4 o'clock, looking from the right-hand side of the front. If your fingers are sitting about 4 o'clock extended all the way forward, that will get that will grab the crop the most sufficient way.
Just maybe we just step back to that transition. I don't know, you guys, you've mentioned obviously the John Deere one. I know we've talked about it in MacDon as well.
So MacDon make well, they call them small seed saver kits, which is effectively the sealing rubbers. One of the guys yesterday said to us, "Oh, yeah, but if you seal up all in front of the front draper, that's your rock trap. That's where they collect rocks." And one of the fronts that we were looking at yesterday had a whole bunch of stones in that little rock trap. My comment about that was don't harvest stones, because in that little rock trap, there's a whole bunch of little holes, and all that small seed will fall out through those little holes. So if you're harvesting, as you're trying to get that Palmer amaranth seed, which is half the size of the canola seed. It'll just pour straight out of there if it collects there. So I would rather seal all of that up all the way to the draper, so that everything that lands on that platform goes onto the center draper and is fed into the machine.
So just a question perhaps to you guys, have you measured your losses around that transition area? Are you doing that? Have you done anything to try and deal with that issue? So firstly, who's measuring? Give us a show of hands. Right. Okay. So no hands, no measuring. Marcel's going to have a conniption where he is in the Blooming Airport line, and so will the boys next to me. So just if we're going to do this stuff, Kath, what do you do?
Yep. If you can measure it, you can manage it. So if you don't know what you're losing, you don't know what you're working with. So we need to find out first, we need to have a, what do you call it, a platform first, the first initial reading, and then we make our changes and see whether it's getting less and less and less. We will never get 100% of our weed seed into the front. But if we know that we're losing 50% of our weed seed that's in the paddocks, if we can, bring that down, bring the losses down, then our kill rate will go up, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
So, yeah, measure, definitely measure.
So, so in terms of measurement, with that, when we're measuring, whether it's putting ice cream containers down around the front, where would you actually place your measurement when you do it generally? To just looking at front losses.
So Brett started off with saying our dividers are the first thing that touches the crop. So containers, whatever you want, underneath the divider. Then in the center of the Draper platform, watch out for the gauge wheels, and then on the transition area at the center Draper belt. So where the side Draper belt and the center Draper belt gets together, just overlap it there and go and have a look. So 3 or 4 spots on the front.
Okay, and then when you got your header driver, your combine harvester driver going, and they go over those trays which are in the canopy, they need to stop before we start throwing rotor loss in there. Yeah.
So all these fans will go and position in the paddock before we get to it. So it's not something that drops off the header. We go and position it in the field. The harvester driver goes over, we cut it, and then probably once those containers or pans or whatever get about halfway with the machine, then we pull up. So before we spray our chaff and straw and everything, before we spray it over our containers, we need to pull up. That way we know whatever's in the pans is just coming from our fronts. It's not out of the machine.
Yeah, okay. And so guys, have you tried anything? Has anyone tried anything in terms of that transition area to reduce their losses? Just raise a hand on the thing if you have, because we just want to see. Okay. Nothing tried. So there's an opportunity for you. Nibs, I just throw to you. We in terms of we're talking, just to I guess try and remind us why we're talking weed, seed, and crop at the same time. What have we found generally in terms of that? Can you give us a bit of an overview what we're thinking around these losses?
Sorry, Pete, I'm not sure of your question. What are weed, seed, and crop in the front?
Why do we talk weed, seed loss and crop loss at the same time?
I normally more talk about that out the back of the machine, Pete, with the rotor losses. I mean, there's Marcel. Hey, Marcel. He's disappeared again. Look, I think you're onto it. I've more the big focus here has been seed retention of the weeds. Mike Walsh measured that a long time ago. We were sort of like 80% seed retention of wild radish, 70 to 80% retention of annual ryegrass at the start of harvest. So you guys at the front just have an enormous opportunity to, with your weeds that are retaining 95% of their seeds, you're going to be able to capture an enormous amount of them. So I just think the big challenge at the front is just the structure of the weeds and just making sure you're laying them on the deck. Yeah, when we're talking rotor loss, which we'll talk about in the future, but Mike Walsh and John Broster, when they measured what rotor loss, we had to be, when we found that we were measuring our grain losses with our drop trays, if we're confident that we're getting all of our grain in the harvester, in the combine, then we know that we're getting our weed seeds where we want them as well. If we're spitting crop out of the rotor, which isn't going to happen with soybeans, we're probably more talking cereals. But when we're finding we're spitting cereals out the rotor, we are also spitting weed seeds out of there as well because they're not threshing. So, but yeah, I think I'm not sure if I've answered that.
That's sort of captured it in terms of what I'm trying to get people to think about, which is in terms of while we talk about in terms of the back of the machine, in terms of where we see weed seeds and crops losses, there's also around the front, which Cassie talked about right up early on, which is we've got to get these in. If we see losses of grain or of crop, we're generally going to be seeing loss of weed seeds out the front. We've still got to get them in there. You mentioned the feeder drum. You were talking about the finger angle, and is there anything you said 4 o'clock? Did everybody understand 4 o'clock in terms of that angle? Yeah, finger timing. Do we change that at all for different types of crop, whether it's a soy crop versus a cereal?
Yeah, when you get to canola, which is big and bulky, we can probably take our finger timing earlier. So again, looking from the right hand side of the machine, then our fingers can come out around 3 o'clock, and like on a clock, 3 o'clock, it will be extended 100%. So that will give us the ability, once the fingers go in, grab the crop, go around the drum. So when the drum gets to the backside, or when the plant gets to the backside of the drum, before the chain grabs it and into the feed house, your fingers are 100% retracted into the drum. So there's nothing to grab hold of the plant and throwing it over the drum again. So with bulky crops like canola, yeah, change the finger angle a little bit. It takes you 5 minutes to change your angle. So it makes a huge difference, first of all, in the feeding, second of all, of throwing it over the drum. So take that 5 minutes and adjust it.
Okay, and when we think about the Palmer amaranth and with this sort of crop, we're thinking about that it's going to be sticking to our crop as well, whether it's a soy that it's going to be above. So that's the same issue we think about that, Brett. So same thing.
Same thing. The biggest point of all of this is, and I think Pete Newman, you should probably tell them those test numbers from WA that applied. I think that's a very relevant point, is that we often don't think enough about what the front is actually doing. We just think if we're cutting it and dropping it on the platform, we've done a pretty good job. But the losses off that platform, if we don't think about it, will mean that, we think we're doing a pretty good job, but we're probably not getting the weed seed at the same time.
Yeah. You should want to give the guys a bit of insight.
Yeah, well, this whole thing that we're involved in all started with a farmer measuring harvest losses out the back of his machine, and particularly with when we're harvesting canola, he just couldn't get his losses down. Could never get them below 3%. His losses were often 5% out of the back of the machine. So we started this project talking about machine losses, about losses out of the back of the harvester. And then last year, there was a project in Western Australia where a group went out and they did tests on 200 different harvesters using Marcel's, bushel plus drop trays. And they measured front losses as well. And we were pretty blown away. The front losses were about matching the machine losses. So we had, for our crops, and I know they're different crops, but, for our wheat, our front loss was about 1% and machine loss was about 1%. But for a crop like barley, our front loss was 3% and our machine loss was 1%. And for a crop like lupins, which is probably something a little bit more comparable to soybeans, our front losses were averaged 8% and our losses out of the back were very low. So it just blew us away, really, that the farmers had all been asking, what about front losses? What about front losses? And when it was finally properly measured, we were pretty blown away about just how bad it was. So it really just is another method about measuring. I don't know, Marcel, if he's listening in, might also be able to comment about how much you've measured front losses, Marcel, if you can, or you might be getting on a plane. But we were pretty blown away about how bad it was with the front losses.
Yeah, Marcel?
Yeah, it's something where we don't pay enough attention to, just as you say it. Once you start measuring, you realize that what you see on the ground is actually 2 or 3 times as high as what you think it is when you just look it on the ground. So Similar experience up here. Yeah.
I think Nooms that the one of the things you mentioned in lupins, which is similar to a soybean, was the range in which those losses were.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
a couple of them were 45% losses with harvesting lupins. So 45% didn't even go in the front. And it is I've never had any experience with harvesting soybeans, but our lupins, they're a pod, they're a legume as well, but they get very brittle, and just the rattling, you just hit them with the front, and they just explode, and the pods pop off, and we just don't get them in the front. Brett might comment more about the challenge of harvesting lupins, but yeah, they're just huge.
Yeah. Well, Pete and I both have a common friend. So I drove his combine for about 7 or 8 years, and about a third of his program then was lupins. And so I would harvest cereal all day, and I'd harvest lupins all night, and then cereal the next day, and then I'd take a night off and sleep. And we literally couldn't go near those lupins if the outside air temp was really above 28 or 30 degrees. It was just economically not viable, even though we had a sheep program in amongst that as well. And the sheep will vacuum clean lupins up; they'll smell them from 10 k's away. So they'll use a lot of that, but obviously we want to be able to put that in. We want to be able to put that in the machine. And as I say, as soon as you put a reel anywhere near lupins, if the temp is up, they explode. They're hitting the windscreen on the combine all day, and you just know that you're losing them. They're going everywhere, so it can be really challenging. So,
is there stuff like that's? I don't know whether it's appropriate in soybean, whether they're using augers or some means of a cross auger on top of these draper fronts. Would that help?
I think it probably would. I mean, with all of my experience, well, not to say all, but the bulk of my experience was with an old, what we call a tin front or an auger front. And we made our own platform extension so that we could get the lupins into that machine. And that dropped our losses by about 3/4 just by doing that, moving the knife 9 inches forward. And I'll speak American, because I know what inches are still.
Yeah.
So we moved our cutter bar 9 inches forward so the plant could actually fall on the platform. And like I said, that reduced our losses by about 75% just straight away. We would take the crop divider off and just leave the pointy divider with no divider bar. And what that would do is lift and part the lupins, and you'd lose a bit off there. We did try a vertical knife, and that made the losses go up, not down. So we knew that. So it was better just with that pointy divider. But it's only a matter of playing, and you've got to go and say, use every tool in your toolbox to get that material in.
Yeah.
So when I was in the US in 2000, I harvested rice, and I harvested ryegrass, and I harvested some cereal, but that was the extent. I was only there for 30 days. We didn't get enough time to do everything.
Yeah.
So I spent a bit of time in Montana. I spent a bit of time in Oregon. And I spent a bit of time in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously it was July, and it was still like mid-cereal harvest time. So yeah.
So in terms of then we talked about the feed drum and trying to get the feed right. While we're focusing on weeds and weed seed management here, we're coming back to getting crop and weed seeds into the machine so we can then put it where we want it to go. So just put it in context, guys. While we talk all around the crops, and while we're not specifically talking a corn or a soybean, we're trying to get that crop into the feeder house now, so that when we get it in and we're starting to thrash it and separate the wheat seed and crop, we want to then be able to direct it in the right area of the machine. That would be fair comment.
Yeah, very fair. Yeah.
So
the object is I get it on the front first. Yep. And then get it on the sieve. So yeah, eliminating or reducing crop losses either from the front or from the separator will help your weed seed management.
So maybe we'll just get to that flow in a sec. Where to get it from the feed drum to into the feeder house itself, there's some comments you guys were talking about the last few days. What are the guys got to think about in terms of those two connection points?
No leakage.
Yeah.
Platform height. I had a machine that wouldn't feed at all a few years ago, and like literally when they married the combine to the header, or the harvester to the front, there was a step in that floor. The floor plate for the front was about 3 inches lower than the floor of the feeder house, and that thing just literally would not feed. And 8 or 10 people had a look at it. I drove 240 kilometres to the machine, spotted it, got some bits and pieces, moved it, changed the world. So little things like that can create issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one.
That's one. Okay. Cassie, you're talking about with the John Deeres, how they fit. What do they need? Because I know some of these guys are running John Deere fronts and John Deeres. So what's your comments specifically around that?
Of the feeding into the feed house.
Yeah.
With me, with any harvester, we want to, obviously we shift material from point A to point B. If we grab it from my front into the machine itself, I need that to be as quick as that. So the sooner we can get that material away from our drum, the better it will be. So our transition between the front and the feed house, I need that to be very quickly. So we've had a look at a machine yesterday. It is possible to shift your feed house chain out towards your front as far as possible without your chain touching your fingers. But if we can get that gap, which is normally about 1 inch, if we can get that gap as close as possible, just to get the material away from there, the sooner we get the material into the machine, the less chance we've got of losing it through the front, or where the connection point is between the front and the feed house.
Yeah.
So yeah, just make sure that all your settings there is correct and grab it away from the front as quick as possible.
You were also talking yesterday about the deflectors they have with the John Deeres.
Yeah, so there's the black deflectors that's bolted onto the front of the feed house. That just forces it away from the side of the chains, more to the center of the chain. So if it is forced to the center of the chain, we will make the machine work better because we don't have any build-up around the top sprockets of our feeder house. So it's just another problem that we don't want. That, if we've got those black cover plates bolted on, it will take it away from the sprockets, and it's a problem that we don't need to deal with later in our harvesting day.
Yeah, it's the same true with if I've got a McDonald front or a very feed front, what is there something similar there that people can do?
There are little bits and pieces on all of these fronts. We just need to remember that what we're trying to do. So we want to strip the material off the feed auger in our front, regardless whether it's an auger front or a Draper front, so that the material feeds nice and neatly in a crop mat up the feeder house. So anything we can do in there to make that neater and quicker and tidier, then that's what we need to do. So clearance between that auger and the floor, retractable finger timing, positioning of the feeder chain and that feed drum, the height of the feed drum off the floor, those things are all critical to get that to happen. The last thing we want to do is repeat material centered around that feed drum, or repeat it around the feeder chain. So it'll go up, not strip off the top sprocket, come around and over the top. Because if it does, it'll go up and over and back onto the platform. So, yeah.
So you mentioned there the height of the feed drum. Is there anything we need to think about relative to different crops, whether it's a soy or versus a cereal?
The feed drum height is generally set by the bulk of material that you're going to put through. So typically across our Western Australian stuff, the further north and east we go, the lighter our crops generally are. So we'll sometimes harvest, a 1.5 ton cereal crop. or God help us, 300 kilos a hectare crop, which we don't really want. And they can become really, really challenging to try and get that material to transition. So the more bulk you've got, the higher that feeder chain can run off the floor, the more clearance it's got there, the better.
Is there any comment, or Newms, you got any comments, or Michael, any comments or questions to the guys at the moment? I'm just trying to look at the chat questions that are coming through.
Yeah. I was just going to pick up on the chat question. Stephen's just put up an idea about something that might improve capturing weed seeds with a corn front.
Yeah.
Corn header. Do you want me to share my screen and show you that?
Yeah, great.
I'm not allowed to. I used to say, well, you might have to go to the chat and open it and share your screen, Pete. But yeah, so it looks like some brushes. I don't know, Stephen, if you can comment. It's like some brushes on the corn header that is designed to minimise yield, grain loss. Yeah.
Can we enable Newms to be able to show his screen?
You should. Michael's got it.
Michael's doing it.
Sorry, it was just a little easier for me to just to do that than figure out how to share it. But yeah, these are the brushes that go on the gathering chains of the corn header. Yep. And I think it's an excellent idea, Stephen. It was one that we actually bought a set of brushes, but they didn't. I guess I didn't do my homework. They didn't fit on the combine we were going to test. But we do want to test these in the future to see if they help improve weed seed capture. I mean, they're really designed for obviously improving grain capture, but we think they would be pretty helpful.
So to just you've got, if you can use the narrow pan, or you might need to use a flat lid to put it in the head of the front to actually show and capture and get some measure. It'd be lovely to see that measure of with and without those brushes there, Michael.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we can see.
Michael, they're not going to fit on every combine.
So they're, yeah. So I think I just ordered the wrong ones, but I think you have to get a set of chains so that these brushes go onto the right chain. But they are different, chains for different headers, right? So if you got a John Deere header, even different makes of models of the John Deere headers, you just got to make sure you're ordering the right chains for those so that the brushes fit on them.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
Give it a go.
Yeah. You've got to try everything.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Any other any questions to the guys? I thought it might be worthwhile just talking about the whole flow in a second, in terms of what happens, what we're trying to do. We're about to wait to see the crops through the machine. Any questions to Cassie or Newms or to Brett?
One question I had that came up, the Draper headers I've seen, they've got basically 5 belts. There's sort of 2 side belts on either side, 2 side belts on the other end. There's the center belt, and there's a gap between, the 2 side belts on the right and the 2 side belts on the left. Are there also kits to seal those gaps up like there are for the center belt?
No, Michael, there's not. But John Deere has done some extensive testing on that gap, because if you look at the front, there's a fairly big gap between those 2 belts. But we've seen videos with all types of crops going over that belt, and the momentum and the belt speed is big enough and quick enough to take the material over to the next belt. So the losses that come through those 2 belts are, you don't need to measure it. It's extremely small.
Perfect.
Yeah. Remember the other thing that's happening. This belt with the feed slat is traveling this way, and it will throw the material as it curves. That material's got enough momentum for it to continue in a straight path. The other one is coming up and underneath it, and it's actually pushing a whole heap of wind with it, and that whole heap of wind goes up through the gap. So yeah, I've tested them before too. We have some over here, and drop your drop tray directly underneath that gap, and you'd think you'd see a line of material in there, but it's not there.
No, it's something you don't need to worry about.
What about if you got varying crops? So if it's some light, some thick crops, and or the wheel tracks, does that cause then issues?
Wheel tracks can be a bit of a problem. Last year, Ben White and I did some testing down at Franklin in a 10 to 10.5 tonne a hectare barley crop, and we were struggling to get decent capacity because of the biomass. So the crop itself was about 2.5 feet tall. We were cutting it at about 6 to 7 inches above the ground. We lifted our front about 2 or 3 inches, got some more capacity, and our losses reduced. But then we did a study on the wheel tracks, and what we were leaving behind in the wheel track was about 4 times what our loss saving was. So we ended up actually taking the harvest loss, slowing down a bit and reducing our capacity to pick up the extra grain that was in the wheel tracks. So yeah, wheel tracks can be a real challenge. People are running controlled traffic, so on the same wheel track all the time. Those wheel tracks have a lot of material that will be laid at a funny angle. It can be particularly difficult to get into the front and particularly difficult to cut off because you're traveling the same direction that your wheel was traveling.
So whether it's a weed, they're trying to get it in off the weed, or whether they're trying to get the crop in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it's challenging for the knife. And it's challenging to actually get it onto the platform. The material has a tendency, because it's laying the same direction you're traveling, you sort of cut over the top of it, and the protective edge of the cutter bar is actually pushing that material down as you're going towards it.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So just perhaps, if there's no questions you guys have got specifically at this point, have you got any questions on front lob, what you're trying to do with your fronts, or challenges with your fronts? Because if not, I'm going to ask Cassie to give us a bit of a, what are we trying to do through the whole machine here? And the reason to do that is we'll talk about both how it affects for both wheat seed and for crop. So is there any questions you guys have or challenges? I know, Michael, there was a couple.
Has anyone looked into the added efficiency that an air reel or an air assist, wind assist system would have to aiding in bringing in more seed?
Has you got any comment on the aerials?
I think Brad's got more experience in the area than what I have.
Yeah.
So we've got plenty of people over here that have done it in various different types. So aerial with the tubes, or a lot of people ran vortex aerials for a while. They work fairly well.
Perhaps you can explain the different systems.
Yeah, so the vortex aerial is just basically a small diameter rotating high-speed fan, and then we can actually angle and change the direction that air blast is facing. Doesn't have anything protruding down into the crop, and it literally replaces anything else. So they're very, yeah, it does, replaces any mechanical finger.
Yeah.
They can be very, very good and very, very effective in some crop conditions. So the heavier materials, we found that the losses in canola would go up, and we found in some lupin crops our losses would go up, but they're quite good on cereals. So the other style of aerials where they have the downswept fingers coming down, the problem that we see with those, they work very, very efficiently once you've got that into the crop, and particularly if you can get the tubes at the same spacing as your standing crop. So if those tubes go between your crop rows, happy days, that works quite well. If they're actually going to contact that crop row, then your losses can go up, because that tube is the thing that causes the shatter. So
in terms of measurement, though, between, and I don't, Nurmsy, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anyone's done an official measure yet. We haven't seen that yet, Nurms? Yeah.
No, we have. I was just reading it just then, so I'll just go back to my screen and read it to you. So that but it's probably not in relevant crops. But that research I was telling you about before, the GGA going and measuring the front, all the losses. So in lentils, so lentils very short legume crop, and quite brutal. The front losses. So there were 5 tested with aerials and 5 without. So the front losses with an aerial was 2.5%, and without an aerial was 6.9. So the aerial was a big advantage in lentils, but faba beans, you know, a bit similar to broad beans, the aerial made it worse. So there was 4% losses with an aerial and 2% without. It was only a small sample size, that one. So, but I'm going to guess that the faba beans are a very big tall crop. I'm going to guess that the aerials were bashing them off, whereas the very low crop of the lentils, the aerial was able to blow it in and without bashing the crop.
Yeah, that could have been spacing related. Hard to know. I think it needs a deeper study, is what I think.
Totally, yeah. I was just showing you those first few numbers.
Yeah.
Aerials on lentils are pretty common, really, and lupins have been common over the years, Brett. But yeah, I think Ben was also talking about the air systems. I can't remember the name of them, where the air is actually hidden in underneath the knife and it blows back from there.
That's the Gearinghoff news.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's a front that's available that's got a it actually blows the air behind the fingers themselves. So it actually helps push it from I guess after it's been cut over any lip and then over the cutter bar itself at the back. And that's an interesting one, but it hasn't been tested much further. And I know that for Australia, the guys involved with that are trying to do some change to that, but they're still good concepts, whether it's aerials that needs further investigation. And I think for yourselves over there, we wouldn't have the experience certainly in your crops. We'd be interested to see what that would look like.
Yeah. One of the machines that I went to visit in South Australia earlier on this year, and the only reason why I went to this machine was that it had a really, really high mill wear rate, which we found was unusual. And we went, they only harvest lentils and they have an aerial. But what they're doing is they actually point the air outlets at the ground in front of the cutter bar, and they bounce the air off the ground. So they drive it really hard into the ground. And that then lifts, it goes in and underneath or through the canopy and lifts the lentils. So their lentil losses are really, really low. The problem is it blows a lot of sand onto the platform, and then the sand goes through and it's the enemy of the mill. So their mill wear rate is about 4 times our average. So if the money you save by picking up the lentils offsets the cost of replacing wearing parts in your mill, then that's all good. But if it doesn't, you might be better suffering the losses. So, yeah.
Lentils are about $900 a ton. I reckon it was probably worth it.
You're right.
I think I just think the overwhelming message is you just have to measure these things. I've just got to get an aerial, have the head of the harvesters with and without, and test them. That we've just been banging on about that for the last couple of weeks, haven't we? On all these field days that we've been doing, just have to put trays down and test. Otherwise, you just really do not know.
Yeah, I know that.
Can we talk more about just exactly how you test? I mean, what kind of trays are you using? Are you counting weed seeds in there? What exactly? How are you going about doing that?
So, in terms of some of the things we've been doing our front loss measurements, so that piece of research that Newms was talking about, they did the machine loss measurements using the Bushel Plus, both the 1 meter tray and covers to do measurements off the axle and out wide off the back of the harvester front. to drop the trays and actually look at rotor and sieve losses and what came off in terms of model machine loss. They also use the narrow tray. So, and it only works in certain crop type of conditions because of the canopy and whether you're also going into doing windrow measurements. But you put the narrow tray, so the narrow tray is about, what's that, about 5 inches wide, four inches wide. You push that into the canopy ahead of the harvester, and you put it long ways. So not to drive the long ways over the top, but it's spread across the width, crossways.
Across multiple rows.
Yeah, that's the good way. Across multiple rows of the crop. And as Cassie was saying earlier, is you put one on, say, where the divider is, and you just got to make sure any of these, looking at the height of your header front that's going in, and whether it's got a gauge wheel in there or a hook that's actually going to knock this tray over, or whether you're
run it over.
Yeah, so those big rubber things that are fairly, they don't help any measurement. We did also use plastic lids, so where the crop was really low, or where they windrow a crop and they put it into the windrow to measure, they buried it under there to do the measurement as well. And at certain times we've actually had to raise the front itself slightly because the guys are going down to 3 or 4 inches in some circumstances to get really low. You're going to have to raise it slightly, or you're going to be knocking your tray over, and you're going to harvest it, harvest slightly, or harvest your tray. Not an ideal thing. And as Cassie said, you've then measured your divider. You've measured in the center. So just off center where your transitions are, so you're getting a measurement there, and then in the middle of your head around your draper or around that joint. Yeah, around the joint area. So you're getting a few different measure spots, and then you're weighing those. So you can use your apps to look at what your losses are, but it's Cassie, right? You look at the kilogram change really is what you look for.
Yep. So a few years ago, that was my job, was to set machines up for losses. So if you put the percentage measure aside and the kilograms per hectare, if you put them aside, that's what I like to concentrate on, is you measure or you weigh the seed that's in the loss trays, and then you get a basis point. Let's start off on 5 grams. And then we know what we've done. We get 5 grams of loss. We make a few changes in our machines or on our fronts, and then go and measure it again. If we can see that 5 grams have changed into 9 grams, right, we're going the wrong way. So we need to go back to where it was and then the other way. What our objective is to go from that 5 grams to as close as 0 grams as possible. So for starters, forget about the percentage, forget about the kilograms per hectare, just concentrate on the grams that you get in your tray and see whether you can get that as low as possible.
So when you're looking at the front losses there, you're seeing what's in those trays, wheat, seed, and otherwise. What are you looking at then? What are you thinking about?
Your reel and your knife first up.
Right. Okay. Does that answer your question on how to measure, Michael? Any other question?
I guess the follow-up would be, are you trying to clean out the crop residue out of that tray that might be in there? Or are you just, to get sort of just grain and weed seeds to make that weight? Or are you, you are, okay.
Can you maybe go through a whole process, Peter, like how to measure the grain loss and then weed seed samples from the combine? We would concentrate lots on the header, but I think on the combine would be a great way to tell them how the sample is cleaned and weighed and whatnot.
Yeah, we are, Amasa, we can go through that. So what Mark's is saying is once you've got your sample in your tray, you've got to separate that sample out, and you're going to pull out the large bits and use your air separator to actually look at what's in there and pull out that sample just so I can go, what have I got in here, whether I'm doing machine or front, but let's focus on the front. I can see what's in there. Am I losing whole heads at the front, or have I got what are my weed seeds looking like in that tray itself when I've blown my sample out before I even go and weigh it? It gives me a very good understanding of what's causing the damage. So if I can see whole heads in that sample, I'm going, my reel's doing a fair bit of damage here. It's a pretty good indicator, to be fair, Brad.
You know, the first thing that touches the crop divider or the reel. If you've got whole heads in there that have come off before the cutter bar has done its job, there's something pushing those heads off. Yep.
So if I'm seeing crop heads, I'm probably getting a resultant weed seed implication. Yeah.
And generally you'll see the weed seed in there as well.
Yeah.
It'll be in the tray as well.
Yeah.
So
But
when we're measuring loss, we don't typically look at the weed seed, but you train your eye and you go, okay, I'm going to separate the grain and the weed seed, and I'll go and see what's there. But typically, if you've got grain loss off your front, you've got weed seed shatter as well.
so you mentioned something else the other day that Kathy, you said when you picked up the tray, you're looking underneath. Is that right? Yeah. What are you looking at there?
Yeah, so the losses can come from a fair bit of different circumstances in the paddock. So there's losses in the field before the header even gets to it. There will be losses there. Hopefully there's nothing, but there could be losses. Then when the machine goes over it, you get your front losses. You get the machine losses. You get losses maybe from spreading. So where you've harvested and your spreaders are spreading the loss into the next part of the paddock where you haven't been harvesting. So there's a few different spots where the losses can come from. One thing that we've done 15, 20 years ago is we just scratch on the ground and have a look and see what's going on there. And then a basic rule of thumb, people will ring me and say, I've got 8 weed seeds in the size of my hand. Is that normal? What's normal? What's your yield? You know, 8 weed seeds on a ton crop, it's going to be good. 8, or it's going to be bad. 8 weed seeds on 10 ton, it's going to make a difference. So when you do your drop tray, when you pick your drop tray up, you can have a look of what's sitting on the ground where the drop tray was sitting. So you lift the drop tray up, everything in there is, yep, this is coming out of the machine. But then we're also going to have a look at what's sitting on the ground. What's on the ground is typical losses that will come from the front. So, you know, sometimes you will pick something up, or you'll pick your drop tray up, and there'll be a head that's halfway threshed that's sitting on the ground. Instead of going back to your machine like we've done 20 years ago, where the hell is this head from? Why isn't the grain threshed out of the head? Nowadays we can actually see, righto, that half threshed head was there before the machine would have gone over it. So it just gives you a bit of a separation of where the losses are from.
Do we have any questions? We probably in the last few minutes, Nooms has had to disappear. I think Marcel's running around in between aeroplanes, but is there any question you have around front and weed challenges you've got? Okay, silence means it's golden. That you're going to be doing so well next time, I can tell, because you've got no questions and you've got 2 experts on my left, so you must be awesome. Okay, so the only, I'll just give a question or comment and I'll open up for Brett and Cassie. Is there's a colleague of mine up in Canada, and he's been doing work in North America, looking at different crops there. And he looked against the aerial using a duck foot. And I know that you've got these paddle times called the duck foot. Yeah. No. Yeah, you got those. Yeah. So he tried that versus an aerial. So they found that it was comparative in different crop conditions to try and use a paddle time. Now, the only question I'd have is, what the heck would happen there?
I think it would shatter it.
You think if it's going to cause major chaff?
It's 2 foot taller in a lot of cases. So
So we need our surface area to be less.
Yeah. Okay. So we need the reverse.
Yeah.
Okay. So
The other one-
don't use that. Bad idea.
The only way you would know really is to have a crack at it.
Yeah.
And that's probably the key message, is that, look, everything works given the correct set of circumstances. And sometimes, what works on one day may not work tomorrow, and what will work in one set of crop conditions may not work in a different set. So, and this is what we find typically here, where we were harvesting just a couple of days ago, right at the peak of the day, it was 22 or 23 degrees. Before we left the paddock, it was down to about 15, and it was going to get really cold.
Yeah. Great for canola.
Yeah, great for canola. So as those circumstances change, what happens with your machine setup may have to change also.
So guys, before we've got next time we'll talk about the thrashing area. Before we get there, perhaps you can just give the guys a short overview. What are we trying to do now? We've got it in the feeder house. What's the aim of what we're trying to do with our material?
So we've talked about cutting and gathering and feeding. So now we've just got to remember what we need to do next. So we need to thrash all of our cash crop. So get that thrashed and then get it all separated to eliminate rotor loss. If you've got rotor loss, you've got harvest weed seed loss as well. And often, we'll go and measure that rotor loss. We'll go and do a drop tray test and collect that material. And what do? We take the grain out of it and we throw the weed seed with the mob, with the materials other than grain. Now start counting that weed seed. If you're trying to harvest for weed seed management, you can't afford to be spreading those again. So the next bit will all be about dividing your crop flow, getting your straw, so getting the material separated and injecting your straw adequately out the back of the machine, and then gathering and storing. Yeah, and I thought that was on silent. There you go. Okay.
It's a khaki.
That's a box of beer. It'll go away in a few seconds. Righto. And getting our separation right, and then putting our grain and a harvest weed seed on the sieve where we can then deal with it. That's what all that'll be about.
So that's really important, because what we've talked about is getting these things into the header front and making crops lie properly and feed it well, because we're trying to reduce loss. Again, loss of both crop and weed seed, so we get it in. And now we're going to be saying, how do we want that material to move? Where do we want it to go? Because there's different things we want to do with different bits of material. Critical, even more critical for you guys who are doing harvest weed seed control. It's a shame we haven't got nibs, but that's what that whole machine element of considering what a weed seed is and a grain. If we're, regardless of what the crop is, we know if we're not managing the grain properly, weed seed's going to be lost as well. Yeah, that's fair.
Correct. And remember what you're trying to do. So your machine was originally designed all those years ago, and it sort of evolved a bit, but it was designed to harvest. And I say to our guys over here, why do we call this thing a header? Because you take the head and a little bit of straw, and that's what you process. When you're harvesting for weed seed management, you're gonna cut everything off 2 inches off the ground. No way. You're going to cut everything off 2 inches off the ground, and you're going to process all this biomass. These machines weren't made to do this. This is going to add a whole pile more complexity to what you're trying to deal with. Okay, and I said at the last meeting, go and bolt a weed seed mill on the back of your machine, and it's going to change everything that you know about how you set your harvester up. Okay, so we're now doing things that are different. You know, we're stubble managing and we're weed seed managing, and we're also harvesting at the same time, and it's going to fundamentally change everything you knew about your harvester.
And on that note,
Don't be scared.
I'm gonna throw back to Michael.
Yeah, well, great. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope the farmers on the call have too. You guys have questions that come up afterwards as you marinate and sleep on the information. Throw them in that WhatsApp group, and while you're there, let's encourage some of the other farmers. I know we had several that we were expecting that aren't on the call, but if you guys could give a little peer pressure to some of the other farmers to join these calls, that'd be great. So I think that wraps us up here for this call, though. I want to say thanks to everybody. Yeah, and good day to our Aussie friends. Good evening to the Americans.
Yeah, guys. Well, good evening, guys. We'll catch up soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.